We've never seen a week like this one. Whipsawing markets, punitive tariffs imposed and then paused, an angry China, fears of recession. President Trump, the man holding the steering wheel, is sending all sorts of conflicting messages. But he did say one thing clearly.
No other president would have done what I did.
Tonight, we'll try to make sense of Trump's trade war, the global economic uncertainty it's unleashed, as well as a brewing constitutional crisis over deportations. Next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by...
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support Washington Week with The Atlantic. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again, from the David M. Rubenstein studio at WETA in Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Good evening and welcome to Washington Week. Like all of you, I'm trying to figure out if there's a method to the seeming madness we've all experienced this past week. This is the kind of week in which you shouldn't, among other things, look at your 401k too closely. I did. Mistake. Donald Trump, a famously transactional president, apparently believes quite deeply in something few economists believe, that high tariffs are the key to strengthening the American economy and American society. Joining me tonight to discuss this belief and its consequences are Zolan Kanno-Youngs, a White House correspondent for the New York Times. Jonathan Karl is the chief Washington correspondent at ABC News. Ashley Parker is my colleague and a White House correspondent for The Atlantic. And Tarini Parti is a White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Well, so if you guys are all here, who's at the White House? I don't even get this. Welcome, all of you. John, Chief. We call you Chief.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chief, let me start with you. Just can you walk us through this week? Jamie Dimon referred to the considerable turbulence that we're experiencing, and he says it doesn't seem to be going away. How did we get here?
I mean, it's considerable. It was 1 week ago today that Donald Trump declared, my policies will never change. He did this after Liberation Day tariffs last week had resulted in a cratering of the stock market. We came into this week with not just a cratering of the stock market, but also a brewing crisis in the bond market, interest rates going up, signs that those policies that Trump said would never change were actually threatening us with not just a bad stock market, but with a potential economic meltdown, the dollar going down, interest rates going up. Trump said, point blank, I know what the hell I am doing. But by Wednesday, you had this abrupt reversal that he and his top people said wasn't going to happen. A 90-day pause, not in everything, but in most of his reciprocal tariffs, all of those not tied to China, except there's a 10% tariff on the rest of the world. So look, bottom line, at the end of the week, where are we? Gold is at a record high. Consumer confidence is very close to a record low. Stock market is down. It came up a little bit, but it's still lost more than $2 trillion in value since Liberation Day.
You keep saying Liberation Day like it's an actual holiday or
That's
something.
the way it was treated.
I know. Liberation Day in the Gulf of America. Tarini, did Trump blink?
It does seem he blinked on the reciprocal tariffs. I mean, we keep sort of forgetting that the 10% across the board tariffs that John just mentioned, there's still a thing. You know, tariffs on China. The U.S. economy is so intertwined with China that the 145% tariff that we're now facing is also a huge deal. But on those reciprocal tariffs, he did blink. There's a 90-day pause. There are negotiations going on. The White House claims there are over 70 countries that want to make a deal. So we'll have to see what happens. But a lot of trade deals take time. So it's unclear how they're going to get this done. But at the end of the day, the president does believe in tariffs. There is going to be some, it is going to be a key part of his economic agenda. It is going to be something that he keeps. He's not going to blink entirely. But for now, on one specific part of his trade policy, he has blinked. I
want to come in a second with Ashley to this question of this deep belief in tariffs. But Zolan, let me ask you first. And well, you're all in the White House all the time. You're covering the White House closely. You're talking to people in the White House. Is there any plan? I mean, actually, you know what? I want you to watch Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and Carolyn Leavitt explain to us the deep strategy here. Let's watch this.
This was his strategy all along, and that you might even say that he goaded China into a bad position.
Many of you in the media clearly missed the art of the deal. You clearly failed to see what President Trump is doing here.
Zolan, did you miss the art of the deal?
No, I didn't. It would be accurate to call that a spin.
You're under oath, by the way.
And I'll say it again. It would be accurate to call that a spin.
Okay.
We can cut through that. The White House, after this saga, has said that this was all part of the plan. This is all part of President Trump's deal making. What this episode showed us is that in a time where it's been hard to find guardrails against this president, we found one, and that was the bond market. Okay. Some of his officials went to him this week and pretty much showed him how this was impacting U.S. treasuries, and that's where he backed off here. It was not all part of one orchestrated plan, and that's also evident by the mixed messaging we saw from the president and his aides, some of which were saying he's going to dig his heels in and keep all these tariffs in place, others saying that this was a negotiation tactic. It was all mixed message, and at the end of the day, he saw the bond market and acquiesced.
I want to come to that question, but stay on this issue of the aides, because one of the things about Trumpology or Kremlinology here is everybody's always trying to figure out who he's listening to, who he's not listening to. Does he listen to anyone? Is there a planning mechanism here? Are there two different White Houses, the official White House and the White House that operates improvisationally in Trump's hands? Who is influencing this seemingly chaotic process right now? Any insight?
Well, he did say people were getting a little bit yippy as he brought down, and I think the people that were getting yippy were not necessarily his aides in the White House. It was what he was hearing from his newfound friends on Wall Street, CEOs. He was hearing from Jamie Dimon went on Fox Business to basically send a message directly to Trump through the best way to send it to him was on television to warn that this was at risking a recession, that this was going to be something that was going to be a recession caused by one thing, his actions. Right. And that's what caused him to come back. Bessent certainly was a vehicle of that within the administration.
Right.
But also Ashley, when Trump's, I was going to say, when Trump says, and this is classic Trump, he says the quiet part out loud, he sends his aides out to claim defying credulity that this is all part of the plan, and then he goes out several moments later and reveals them to be liars when he says, well, people got yippy, people got queasy, so I changed my mind. He doesn't say this was all part of the plan. He basically makes clear that on Wednesday morning, based on other signals, he aborted whatever ostensible plan there was to totally reverse course.
Right. So just stay on this White House subject for today. Who is the most influential person in this other than Trump himself right now?
We have seen that shift. So, for weeks it was Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. It was Peter Navarro. They had the president.
Peter Navarro is the famously hawkish trade advisor.
They had the president's ear, but we've seen in the last few days the sort of center of gravity here is shifting toward Scott Bessent, who's the Treasury Secretary. He's someone who the White House believes can calm the markets. He knows Wall Street. He can sort of send that message out a little bit better than sort of the mixed message that we've been hearing from others.
Go a little deeper on that. The Scott Bessent, before he became Treasury Secretary, have a fixation on the importance of tariffs?
he did not like the others in the administration did, which is why on Sunday he was the one who went to Mar-a-Lago and talked to the president. What he did in those conversations is he focused on the number of countries that are willing to negotiate with the president. He sort of tried to make the art of the deal president talk about deal making and shift his focus from tariff this country, tariff that country, into sort of making deals.
Right. Ashley, come to this question of tariffs. I mean, this is a very transactional president, as we all know. It's hard to identify a ideological or idealistic belief system. Tariffs are something that this man has thought about for decades.
Yeah, that's true. He's not particularly ideological, but there are a few areas. Immigration is one, trade and tariffs are the other, where you can go back and look at things he said before he even considered himself a possible political contender that he wrote in his books.
Right.
And tariffs are one of them because it goes to his core belief of never wanting to, on the one hand, he always paints himself as a victim, but he also never wants to be a victim. He never wants to having the wolf.
He fears being a victim.
He fears being a victim, right? And so he hates the idea that anyone is taking advantage of him or taking advantage now of his country, of the United States. So tariffs also go back to that deal making of he does not want America in his eyes to be getting a quote unquote bad deal. And he fundamentally, despite not having a particularly clear ideology on a number of things, he fundamentally believes that trade imbalances mean that America, is getting ripped off. Is getting ripped off. Yep.
John, explain that.
First of all, I would say that trade is protectionism is more core to him than immigration. I mean, this is the thing. His worldview, so much of it is set in the 1980s and early 1990s. And in this case, it was the Japanese and Japanese cars and Japanese motorcycles. And the Japanese were buying Rockefeller Center. They bought Pebble Beach. And this, America was getting ripped off and the Japanese were ripping us off. Well, then, the Japanese economy didn't grow and ours did grow. He's on to China. But it's always the notion that America's getting ripped off. So yes, if we're buying coffee beans from Colombia, you might argue that's because we don't have coffee beans in America.
Right.
But
we give money and then they give us coffee and we're all supposed to be happy.
We're not really getting ripped off. We got coffee beans.
And even immigration, briefly at its core, comes back to that idea of getting ripped off and getting a bad deal. When he talks about it, right? So these people are coming, they're taking your jobs, they're taking your social security, which is not true. They're paying into a system where they're not really getting back. But again, it's that you, the American, are getting a bad deal from another country or from a person from another country. That is the through line, the getting ripped off.
Just stay on this for a second. It's an open parenthetical sort of question, but does he have beliefs? All of his beliefs, or these core beliefs, all date back 40 plus years. Yeah. Does he have new beliefs? Do these beliefs change over the decades? I mean, you've written books about them.
Yeah. Well, I guess his belief in the 2020 election being stolen was a.
No, he knew that it was stolen in 1990.
Yeah. No, but so much of his worldview was truly set in the 1980s.
1980s New York City real estate.
Yes, 100%. That's why you go back and you look at old Trump interviews, and they're so revelatory about where he is now. I mean, the world has changed in countless ways. His views have fundamentally not changed on these core issues, and I think there is no more core issue to him than this notion of trade and the need for protectionism, and America's getting ripped off.
Right.
And we saw that in the 2024 campaign when his advisors wanted him to talk about, groceries, the grocery store prices, egg prices, but he was so focused on trade and immigration. Those are tariffs and immigration. Those are two things he loved talking about. Obviously, he liked to meander into other topics, but those were the two issues he remained focused, even though his advisors wanted him to go specifically on grocery prices over and over again.
Zolan, what do we know about what his base thinks about trade and tariffs right now? How long are they going to go for this ride?
Well, you did have, some. We recently did a story where we went back to some of his voters. My colleague called some of them, and I think there's a attachment and still an energy around the messaging around America getting ripped off and around tariffs. However, people don't want consumer prices to go up. People don't also like where their 401k goes as well when you have a period like we just saw in the last 2 weeks. And when some of my colleagues went back to some of his supporters and asked, what are you thinking about all of this as you watch your 401k and what have you, some people were saying, this isn't what I asked for, not this level of tariffs. I'm okay with him putting America first, but not if it impacts my retirement savings account.
Right.
And maybe his grand scheme over the course of several years would work, and somehow American manufacturing would come back. If that's true, it's going to take a long time. The thing that will happen pretty close to immediately is prices going up. And that's going to be a big challenge.
And remember, he said during the campaign, I'm bringing prices down on day one. That was the promise to his base. So now, if you have this gamble where you say, look, I'm implementing all these tariffs, you just go through some, in their words, short-term economic frustration, and American manufacturing will be back. Well, for one, it's unclear just how short-term that will be, and that's also not what was said during the campaign.
And his advisors are acutely aware of those promises. Every single one who I've talked to says that the midterms will be an absolute disaster unless he is able to fulfill his promises. And when you ask them what promises, first and foremost are those economic promises. It's those grocery prices, it's no tax on tips. They understand that that is key to his political success.
These factories that make iPhones are not going to be built between now and the midterm election. I mean, it's going to take a lot. Even if we didn't have an unstable situation, a lot of manufacturers are going to be like, the tariffs come in, the tariffs go away. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We're not going to spend 10 years investing in manufacturing where we could do it cheaper somewhere else. I mean, it just doesn't.
I do think, though, it's hard to kind of say just how much this will sway his base until we do see consumer prices go up for a long period of time. As of this point, like, this has still been a back and forth, and just how much it'll actually move his base, I think.
And also, there's going to be scapegoating. I mean, it's it's not going to be Trump's fault if prices.
Whose fault is it going to be?
Well, it's obviously going to be Biden's fault, and it's going to be a bunch of other. But it's not going to be Trump's fault. And his core supporters, are going to think that he's trying to fix the mess that he inherited.
You know the supporters as well as anyone. How long can you blame Biden before it sounds like?
I mean, he's trying. He's not relenting.
I guess we'll find out
on that defense.
We're going to find out. I want you to listen to something that President Trump said about China and about this possible coming conflagration, economic conflagration with China.
China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it. It's one of those things they don't know how quite. They're proud people. And President Xi's a proud man. I know him very well, and they don't know quite how to go about it, but they'll figure it out.
Ashley, John, is this becoming a battle of wills between Trump and Xi?
I mean, first of all, I think it's interesting. There were a number of times this week where he seemed to be basically pleading with the Chinese to give him a call. President Xi's a friend of mine. He's a really smart guy. I know they want a deal. The Chinese are not calling. They're not picking up the phone. And I thought also interesting to hear him talk about how the Chinese are proud people. And at the same time this week, we saw J.D. Vance refer to the Chinese as peasants. We're buying things that Chinese peasants are making so that they can buy our treasuries. I don't know how that squares with talking to a proud people, but I think it's, he desperately wants a deal with China. And right now, China is not interested in a deal.
China's continued to retaliate, too. I mean, they've said over and over again, don't retaliate from the U.S. side, and China has. Also, it's an interesting negotiation tactic. From the U.S. as well as China accounts, there's little evidence that there were actually any calls, steps to meaningfully negotiate before these tariffs went into place.
What you're suggesting is that he's been waiting forever to impose tariffs on China, and regardless of conditions, impose tariffs on China?
I think that might be more than suggesting. But
yeah. No, but so again, go to this question of blinking. Who do you think blinks first?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't think Trump knows. I don't think China knows. I think they're both.
Xi is not facing midterm elections in 2026 because he's never facing elections.
I mean, I think Trump is going to try to withstand this for as long as he can, but there is going to be a lot of pressure, especially with consumer prices, as Zolan mentioned. The two economies are interconnected, and there are going to be major repercussions in the coming weeks.
And this is going to hurt the Chinese. I mean, this is going to hurt the Chinese economy.
Sure.
I mean, arguably more than it's going to hurt our economy. But again, you refer to the fact Xi does not need to worry about midterm elections or his own re-election or his own, I mean, you know,
the Chinese have been through worse periods of economic hard times.
Yeah.
And this is also why the markets didn't suddenly completely settle after Trump backtracked on Wednesday, because the markets are sort of saying, we don't necessarily think anyone is going to blink sufficiently quickly.
And it's important to say he backtracked. It was a total reversal, for sure. But it still leaves in place the largest, one of the largest tax increases that we have ever seen, the largest tariffs on China in more than 100 years. I mean, we're still in a place with 10% on every nation around the world and, you know, 145% tariffs on China. This is not a full backtrack.
And the big question of uncertainty, it still leaves in place too, because we saw in the campaign, he talked about across-the-board tariffs, and then it went from across-the-board to reciprocal, and then some combination of the two, and now they're making deals with countries that we don't know how it's going to turn out.
Look, I was planning on doing another 2 hours on Smoot-Hawley, but I got to pivot to a couple other subjects. I'm sure we'll be coming back to this. Two important things: possibly incipient constitutional crisis over whether a particular deportee to El Salvador is going to be returned. Can you give us the state of play right now?
Sure.
Zolan,
the Supreme Court basically came down and directed the administration to take steps to return this specific deportee, a Maryland man who, just, it's worth reminding folks, was deported, and the U.S. had found that he had some legal status. The administration admitted in a court order that it was an administrative error to remove that man as well. So the courts have said that they want the administration to take steps to return him. That deadline, the administration was directed today to outline what those steps would be to return that person, and they said essentially that they want more time. They want to report back until next week. So you still have this fight ongoing that has had legal experts worried that we could be getting closer to a constitutional crisis.
Ashley, Trumpologist. Is he, that's your new title.
I'm hoping for a PhD in Trumpology.
PhD in Trumpology, senior Trumpologist. Do you think he would ever openly defy the Supreme Court? Are we heading there?
I think we're certainly heading there. If you look at his comments and you look at the comments of his vice president, the Overton window has shifted, and there is talk about impeaching or floating the idea of impeaching judges if you don't like their rulings. His administration, in many ways, has already started to defy judges. It is worth noting he still speaks with a lot of respect for the Supreme Court.
Just a couple minutes ago, too. He actually got off Air Force One and said, if the Supreme Court were to tell me to return somebody, I would.
But he also believes the Supreme Court are my justices, his justices. So who knows how he'll speak of his justices if they repeatedly defy him.
I don't think he would, but I know there are people around him that would encourage him to. And also, I mean, frankly, look at the reaction to this ruling. You know, Stephen Miller was basically acting like it said something different. I mean, this was clearly a defeat for the administration. He said it was a victory for the administration.
John, let me go to one more subject. It's a subject that makes me feel a little yippy. It's these executive orders that are targeting individuals who have been critical, individuals and law firms, obviously, that have been critical of President Trump. This week, Miles Taylor, former Homeland Security, Chris Krebs, the former head of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, were targeted very personally for investigation and the implication of prosecution. And this is what, I mean, this is the most remarkable part of the Chris Krebs executive order to me. It stated, Krebs, through CISA, the cybersecurity agency, falsely and baselessly denied that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, including by inappropriately and categorically dismissing widespread election malfeasance and serious vulnerabilities with voting machines. This executive order is saying Chris Krebs should be investigated because he says that I lost the 2020 election. Donald Trump lost the 2020 election.
Chris Krebs did something very important after the election. He said clearly this was a secure election. The election was not stolen. And now he finds himself an executive order from the President of the United States directing the Justice Department to investigate him. That in of itself, no matter what the issue would be, is an extraordinary moment.
Right. Tarini, I'll end with you. I mean, give us, frame this out a little bit. I mean, this seems like we've entered a new phase where he's going to potentially prosecute former officials of his administration for saying that he lost in 2020. That's, we're heading into Orwellian territory.
That is definitely a step farther than we've seen him go with, law firms that he's also been, waging a retribution campaign against. So this is definitely a step further.
Right. I'm sure we're going to come back to that subject next week, but we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank our guests for joining me, and thank you at home for watching us. To read David Brooks's article on how ideological conservatives lost control of the Republican Party to the reactionary right, please visit theatlantic.com. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by Consumer Cellular.
Certified financial planner professionals are proud to support Washington Week with The Atlantic. CFP professionals are committed to acting in their clients' best interest. More information at letsmakeaplan.org.
Additional funding is provided by Ku and Patricia Ewan for the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.